Wonderful. So thank you very much for having me here in this wonderful place. Very beautiful around here. I can see why you've moved here, Vitaly. So today I'm talking about essentially, carbon emissions and software and kind of that whole space and what is going on. But before that, a little bit about me. Asim Hussain, as I said, Executive Director of the Green Software Foundation, also Director of Green Software at Intel. There are my links. I don't really hang around on Twitter this much these days. You can usually find me on LinkedIn eventually. I have 2 children. I live in the UK, a place just south of London called Crawley, but we call it Creepy Crawley. It's a bit weird. I like to grow things. Actually, that's kind of what I do outside of building things. In the summer, I grow a lot of food at home. So right now, we're growing a huge amount of tomatoes. Every time guests come around our house, I always give them a tomato plant on the way home. So a lot of that. And in winter, I grow mushrooms, believe it or not. So those are, on the left-hand side, are something called pink oyster mushrooms. If anybody's vegan here, pink oyster mushrooms is the closest you're going to get to bacon, interestingly. You're vegan, so you've got lower expectations. So yeah, it's lower expectations. On the right are blue oyster mushrooms, very nice and kind of Asian food. And in the middle is something called lion's mane, which is it's good for, I use it in like some sort of fish dishes, and it's really good for the brain, apparently. But for the last over 3 years now, I've been really getting more and more hyper-focused in just one area and trying to answer one very specific question, which is, what is the responsibility of software practitioners in sustainability? What is our role to play in this epic challenge that we've got right now? Earlier on in the days, I started off, I joined a community called climateaction.tech. It's still around. If you want to join a community, it's a great community to join. I eventually became a co-organizer of it. And then at Microsoft, I became something called the Green Cloud Advocacy Lead about three odd years ago. And then about a year and a half ago, we launched something called the Green Software Foundation. I'm the executive director of that. That's grown to about 35 member organizations, several hundred people taking part all over the world, everybody kind of trying to figure out trying to figure out the answers to this problem. And about a month ago, I joined Intel as a director of green software. Now, I've been really trying to, you can see where my journey of my career is going. So, and about 3 or 4 years ago, I thought this was going to be like a checklist. I thought green software was just a checklist, something we just tick off and we're green. But over the years, it's just really discovered that really what we're talking about here is an entire field of computing that we're trying to kick off. And we're at year 1 in that journey. So you're not really going to get a lot of answers in this talk. You're probably going to get a call I'm going to be asking a lot of you to help us find the answers. But that's really where we are. A lot of us are it's very exciting to be at this stage of a new field of computing. There's things I do. I'll write an article just offhandedly, and then 4 months later, it becomes the word people use for this, and I'm like, oh my God. So we're at that stage here right now. Everything is very, very early stages, which is very exciting. But really kind of narrow it down, what is the problem that we're solving? There's a lot of sustainability space gets more and more complex year by year. We have our own language. It becomes a very cliquey environment. It's very hard for people to break into it and understand what we're talking about. But I always think it's really important to go to first principles. And it's just very simple. It's very, very simple. There's just too much carbon in our atmosphere, literal carbon molecules in our atmosphere. And we're just trying to get that down. So when someone's talking to you about sustainability and offsets and renewable energy, just think in your mind, carbon molecules in our atmosphere, getting that down. That's it. It's no more, no less complicated than that. But how do you actually reduce carbon emissions? This is why this is a whole field of computing. You've got to learn all this stuff, right? This is how do you actually reduce carbon emissions? And this is the other thing I get. I get people like, oh, we're reducing. I'm like, well, what do you mean by reducing? Yeah, it's actually really important to dig into the specifics. especially us as software practitioners, because it's the specifics is where we get involved, and we'll understand how we fit in. So when people say they're reducing emissions, there's really just 3 avenues for reducing emissions. One is called elimination, which means just not emitting carbon in the first place, which is the ideal solution because the goal is number of carbon molecules in the atmosphere. The other one is like you've emitted the carbon, it's in the atmosphere. What are you going to do to nullify some of the impacts? Those are offsets. And there's 2 types of offsets. There's a removal offset and an avoidance offset. Removal means literally taking the carbon molecule from the atmosphere and putting it somewhere else, so it's out of the atmosphere. And avoidance is just paying somebody else not to emit carbon. Like a good example of this would be a flight. If you're flying somewhere, I flew here, if you're flying somewhere, the elimination solution would be not to fly. The removal solution would be to fly, do something, plant some trees to offset the impact of that. And the avoidance solution is find somebody who was going to fly and pay them not to fly, right? That's the avoidance solution. So it's really important to know when people say like, oh, we're reducing emissions, to understand like which avenue they're talking about. Because there's many paths to zero. Like we talk about reducing, there's many paths to get to that point. So I'll hear another term that people talk about, oh, we're carbon zero. Oh, we're heading for a carbon zero organization. Our platform is carbon zero. What do you mean by carbon zero? What does that really mean? So let's just say like you've got some emissions here. Let's see if this works. Let's say these are your total emissions of your company or your product or your website. To get to zero, you could eliminate 100% of the emissions, which is impossible. Like, how do you eliminate? Like, your software emits emissions, but that's like one way to zero. And I think a lot of people just assume when people talk in carbon zero, and that's what they mean. When you hear a company talk about being carbon neutral, there's multiple there's one standard around this that you may or may not adopt. But what carbon neutral really means is, I'm going to measure everything, and then I'm going to buy offsets, either neutralization or compensation offsets, to just nullify it. But that carbon is in the atmosphere. That carbon is warming the planet right now. It's in the atmosphere. You're just going to do something to mitigate it. You might have heard of organizations do these things called net zero targets. You might have heard the term net zero here or there and the other. There's one standard for it, and if they were to adopt that standard from the Science Based Targets Institute, what that means is 90% eliminated and 10% neutralized permanently, that you can't like pay somebody else not to emit. You've got to take that. You've got to not put carbon in the atmosphere. And what carbon you have put in, you've got to get it out of the atmosphere and put it back somewhere else, right? That's the definition of net zero. Net zero is our bag, right? This is the world that we live in. This is what we can help out with, is elimination of emissions. You don't hire us to offset. You hire us to reduce the emissions that software is all about. And so that's kind of our world. So if you've got an organization that's got a net zero target, that's where the stuff I'm about to tell you makes sense for them. Because eliminations is the hardest problem. It's the hardest problem. Offsets is easy compared to eliminations. And it's becoming a lot more common. Honestly, I've been in this space like 3-4 years now. 3-4 years ago, no one really cared anything about what I was saying. 2 years ago, everybody started caring, and now it's just the interest is off the charts. That's because more and more organizations are setting very stringent net zero targets. 1/5 of the world's largest companies have now set these targets. And I have this feel, like, I know I work with a lot of people who, inside the organization, a lot of execs, and it's kind of an oh shit moment. Oh God, we've set a net zero target. What are we going to do? Right, what are we going to do? Oh my God, we've set this. Or the previous CEO set the net zero target, got the 100 million bonus and pissed off, and now it's my job to now commit to this target, right? So there's a lot of, and you've not just set a carbon neutral target, you've set a net zero target. So you've got to eliminate emissions like 7% every single year, right? Eliminations. So this is what green software comes in. Green software is about eliminating emissions. Which is why there's a lot of interest in it, because it's like one of the paths to eliminations. How do you eliminate software emissions? There's really just 3 routes. Consume the least energy efficiency, something called hardware efficiency, and carbon awareness, which is where all the fun's at these days, and I'll talk about carbon awareness in a bit. But there's a lot of these are just the 3 paths. I've been at this for a while. I keep on asking people to come up with something which is another path. No one's come up with anything that's another path. These are the 3 paths. These are the 3 ways you can eliminate some of those software emissions. Energy efficiency. I mean, some of this maybe should be, well, maybe this isn't obvious. This wasn't obvious for me. Like, we think of electricity as clean, right? I think like psychologically we think of it as clean. When I plug my laptop in, there's no smell, right? It's clean. My hands aren't dirty. There's no soot there. It's not like it's not like I'm not like rubbing the exhaust of a car or something. We think of it as clean, but actually electricity is one of the dirtiest things on the planet. It's actually the single biggest emitter of carbon emissions is electricity. That's because most electricity is still created through burning coal. Actually, most electricity is still created through burning the dirtiest coal. It's practically dirt is what they burn, because the other coal created acid rain, so we killed that. It's just the world that we're in. But there's a lot of electricity is created through burning coal, oil, natural gas. Obviously, something we talk about a lot these days. But electricity isn't clean, and so therefore, just reducing the amount of electricity your applications generate or consume is a big helps just to reduce emissions. Right? We call electricity a proxy for carbon. It's a carbon proxy, reducing electricity consumption reduces carbon emissions. The challenge is, how do you measure electricity? Well, I don't know anything about this. I always found it fascinating when I started this journey. My life for 2 decades has been building software, right? And yet I know nothing about electricity, right? The software I now work at Intel. I work with people who build chips all the time. I'm constantly going, voltage, this, that, or the other. I didn't know what electricity was. It might as well just be magic. Plug it in, I get 4 liters of magic out, right? Like, how does electricity, what does it work? You actually have to understand very deep details of electricity to be a green software practitioner, which is quite interesting. One of the things is, what is the measure of electricity? So maybe you heard a joule. A joule is like a volume of electricity. A watt is a rate. So a watt means 1 joule per second. It's a rate. A kilowatt is 1,000 joules a second, and a kilowatt hour is a volume of electricity. So it's like, what if you let that run for an hour? How much electricity would you end up with? So that's how you measure it. It's really hard to measure electricity. There's actually very few. Safari's got some features in it from the web space. A lot of people end up using something that's like literally you plug your laptop into something and then plug that thing into the wall, and that's how you measure the electricity with a wall meter. One of the few software tools is actually owned by Intel. We have Intel RAPL. And I was asking a team the other day, I was like, listen, everybody uses this thing called Intel RAPL, but I can't find the documentation for it. And the guy sent me back a message. He goes, oh yeah, it's page 3,343 of this PDF. Is a document. And I was like, interesting. Should we discuss putting this on the web somewhere? And like, oh, that's interesting. Never thought about that before. So we need to get better at kind of publishing some of this stuff. But that's not one of the software measures that there is out there. And there's a couple of other tools as well. But we're very early in these stages, so we need to kind of explore. And so yes, energy efficient applications. So that's it. An energy efficient that's one of the goals is energy efficiency, and just use the least amount of energy possible, because energy is a deep emitter of carbon emissions. Yeah. Carbon awareness. I'll be honest with you. I may have coined this term. I don't know if I did. It got messy. It's difficult to know, but we probably should have picked a different term, but it's too late now. This is the term. So carbon awareness. So how clean or dirty is your electricity? Right? How clean or dirty is it? there's actually a measure for how clean or dirty the electricity I'm charging right now coming from my wall socket. It's called a carbon intensity of electricity. And it's grams of carbon per kilowatt hour. And now we know a kilowatt hour is a volume of electricity, right? The global average for 2019 was 512 grams per kilowatt hour of carbon. And this is difficult to visualize. What does that mean? Like, what is 512 grams of carbon? Imagine, that's half a kilo. Imagine half a kilo of soot, ash in your hand. It would be quite a large volume. That's how much went into the atmosphere for a kilowatt hour. And so that's kind of the global average, right? But it varies by location. This is where things get very interesting. It varies by location. Some parts of the world just have more wind farms, solar, nuclear, things like that. Some parts of the world just have a lot more coal-burning power plants. So this varies at different parts of the world. So just by running things in a different location, you can reduce your carbon emissions. This is a term called location shifting, or sometimes it's called spatial shifting. So it's running things in different locations. Nothing else, just in a different location, reduces your carbon emissions. But it also varies by time in very interesting ways. So if you're in a region which has, and a lot of countries now have some amount of wind and solar, and it's sunny right now, so a lot of the electricity is going to come from solar. Oh, we're in Germany. Yeah, a lot of electricity is going to come from solar in Germany. Actually, I have no idea about our region. I'm just guessing. But and so that means when more electricity is coming from wind and solar, your electricity is cleaner. So it's fewer grams of carbon per kilowatt hour. But if the wind stops blowing, these lights still need to work. These screens still need to work. So the only thing the utilities can do is they'll just burn more coal and burn more gas. That's the only way they can make sure enough electricity is flowing when wind and solar is kind of going up and down. I actually think of a lump of coal as like, it's a chemical battery. That's all it is. It's a really good chemical battery. And we're trying to replicate that with other things. So it varies by time. So what does that mean? Well, it means running things at different times can have an impact. So if you're going to run, this is a very horrible graph, but I haven't found a better way to visualize it. So if you're trying to run something at this time, but there's a lot of electricity is really dirty, if you just shifted it by 1 hour, you could be using cleaner electricity. And the studies are showing if you've got 6-hour flexibility is the best time window, you can get the best returns on your investment by shifting things 6 hours. In the web space, this is quite challenging because click on a web page, 6 hours later you get the return back. But your website has other things behind it that might be benefit for something like this. And there's also really interesting stuff. So I've got some colleagues at Intel that are looking at this is very research-based areas, but like networking. Like, can you route packets around the world through the greenest parts of the world at that current moment in time? And like maybe it pauses at the end of this country and doesn't go into that country until that country's electricity, the sun's shining, then it passes the packet into that country and goes through. And it just sounds wild, but actually that's how you pass networks. If you're in the space industry and you're trying to send data to the moon and stuff, you have to have this kind of network protocols, delay-tolerant network protocols. So there's kind of some thinking of deploying it here. You again wouldn't use that for a website, but maybe with like Dropbox, you're kind of like syncing in the background, that kind of stuff's okay. Where I think in the web space it gets a little bit more interesting is something called demand shaping, which is as the electricity, over a course of a day, the electricity is going to become cleaner, then dirtier, then cleaner, then dirtier. Can you adjust your application? Can you make it flex to do more when things are clean and less when things are dirty? So a great example of this is a Climate Action Tech and a friend of mine called Chris Adams, they built something called Branch Magazine, and it's a magazine, online magazine, which changes depending upon how clean or dirty the electricity is. So this right now, this is what you'd see if you're visiting the website, and right now the electricity is really clean. When the electricity is less clean, it switches off color images and goes more to black and white images. When the electricity is really dirty right now, you don't get images, you flip to text. So that's kind of like one of the ideas that are being floated around called demand shaping in applications. Other ideas being floated, if you're doing a video conference call, just tune down, the resolution if things get dirty, and tune up the resolution if things get cleaner, things like that. So that's demand shaping. If you wanted to kind of like do any demand shaping, you have to get data. You have to know what the electricity, how clean or dirty it is. There's a couple of data sources. If you're in the UK, the top one's great because it's free. And you don't even need to log in. It's just completely free. The other two, WhatTime is really good. If you're doing stuff in the US, they have great data for the US. Electricity Map has great data for Europe. But they tend to be, they're free tiers, but predominantly you have to pay to get the more data. So unfortunately, this is an area you've still got to pay to get a lot of that data. At the foundation, have I mentioned the foundation? I have, yeah. At the foundation, we're also building something called a carbon-aware software development kit, just to simplify this whole process of building carbon-aware applications. And it's being developed right now, and I'll tell you, we're running a hackathon actually at the end next month to encourage people to build more kind of carbon-aware functionality and carbon-aware features in the application. But that's an SDK that we're building to build carbon-aware applications. All right, carbon awareness. Spent a fair lack of time on that. It's very interesting, a very hot topic. This is the easiest way to get into green software, is carbon awareness. Do more when electricity is clean and less when it's dirty. That's basically the rule of carbon awareness. The last one, hardware efficiency, is kind of a challenging one to talk about, but we'll talk about it here really quickly. I think we mentioned, Utel was talking about laptops, mobile phones. Everything emits carbon. So when this thing was built, a lot of carbon was emitted, and when it gets disposed of, more carbon will be emitted. That's called the embodied carbon, or sometimes called the embedded carbon. And it's kind of like, by the time I bought this phone, that's already a sunk cost. So as a software person, like, what can I do? What's the advice for me? And the advice really, one of them is to extend the lifespan. Like, I actually was forced to buy a new one of these, just because the old ones, the apps I needed to use for work did not work on the old one anymore. They weren't slow, they literally did not install, they could not work, because it's called software-driven obsolescence. It's kind of, you have to throw away hardware devices just because software doesn't work on it anymore. It was perfectly fine. I still loved it. I hate this phone. Passion, I hate this phone. So extending the lifespan of devices is a really important thing, and I think this is one area that we should be really thinking a lot more about. If you're in the cloud space, it's really about increasing the utilization of servers, because the dirty secret of the cloud is that most servers are idle. If you're not on like what's called a hyperscaler like Amazon or Microsoft or Google, the global average utilization is 10%. So like most servers are sitting at 10% utilization. In the hyperscalers, it's closer to kind of 30–40%. But most servers are actually idle, because we don't seem to like to push them to 100%. And that's really what you want to do, is kind of push it to 100%. And that's hardware efficiency, like use the least amount of embodied carbon possible. Right, measuring. Oh, you thought this was tough. I'm about to show you an equation. I'll really try hard not to show an equation, but I think it's the only way. So, like, at the end of the day, like, I've been at this space for a while, and I've really avoided doing anything with measurement because it's so hard to get any people to measure anything, but you have to. So one of the things we've been working on in the foundation is I'd never like to show any equations. Hopefully this is an easy one. So this is like a methodology we've been developing to measure software emissions, because a lot of people, like when the foundation was formed, like I asked all the member organizations, I said, what's the biggest problem that we should be solving? And they all went measurement. Like, we're not going to invest any money in anything until you give me a way of measuring the impact of that work, right? So I'm not going to do anything. And so we started off, and this kind of equation, and it's not just equations, there's a whole load of other stuff. This has been built by other methodologies for measuring this stuff has been built by accountants and people in the manufacturing industry. This is something built by people who build software. So it's built by software people for software people. And it's basically a rate of carbon emissions. So maybe we're getting streamed on some platform, I don't know where. Let's say we're getting streamed on YouTube. This is called an SCI score. YouTube's SCI score might be carbon per minute. How does carbon per minute for YouTube compare to Vimeo? How does carbon per minute for Zoom compare to Team, compared to Google? That's kind of what this is all about. And it's all about energy, the energy you consume. I is that carbon intensity, like how clean or dirty your electricity is. And M is all that the amount of hardware that you use, and R is the per minute or something like that. So this is so if you've got customers or anything and they're asking well, we need to explore, we want to explore sustainability. How do we measure this stuff? Go to the foundation, look at the SCI standard, and that's one of the things that we're working towards. We're trying to get this to be an industry. Well, it'll be a voluntary standard from the industry, but we're also trying to get it to become mandatory. It's going to get interesting. If you want to actually know some more specific things to do to reduce the carbon emissions of your software, the foundation is creating a patterns catalog, and you can go to it. It should be launched around COP this year, November this year, and you can go to it. Anybody, if you're a machine learning engineer, you go to it and you look, well, what are the patterns as a machine learning engineer, things that I can do to reduce my emissions? I'm a web designer. I go to the web design catalog. What are the emissions? What are the things I need to do to reduce the emissions of my web property? And it's going to have lots of advice. This is some advice that comes from the Amazon, the current kind of Amazon advice in this area. And you can see, this is all about, pick a region that's got more renewables. And if you pick a region that's got more renewables, your energy is going to be cleaner, and therefore your I is going to go down. And that's kind of where this advice is really coming from. We're trying to get advice that you can really clearly, easily see, if I was to do that, what impact would it have? And that's kind of where we're going with the SCI standard. And then this is using a CDN. How actually does using a CDN impact your score? Well, it reduces the energy in your embodied carbon. This might seem complicated, but trust me, it's a lot less complicated than what exists right now. If I started talking to you about scope 1, 2, 3 in emissions, and scope 3 category 11, and all that other stuff. So this is a much more simplified version of what exists right now. And this is the part that I'm really proud of, but the only way to reduce your emissions is elimination. If you bought an offset or something, your score's never going to go down. It's a little bit contentious sometimes, but it's a decision that the team made, and it's a really brave decision, and I'm really proud of them for making it. But it means that if you've got eliminate, it means that if you're an organization with a net zero strategy, and you're like, oh shit, I've got to eliminate 90% of my emissions, how am I going to do it? Well, adopt the SCI as a score, reduce it. The only way to reduce that score is through eliminations, so you've got a strategy right there to eliminate your emissions. So just remember this, if you've got a net zero strategy, or you're working with somebody who's got a net zero strategy, SCI helps them meet a net zero strategy, is the main takeaway of this. Big thing coming up. So in October, forgotten the exact date, Foundation is running a hackathon. It's called a Carbon Hack. We're using that software development kit I showed you earlier on, that Carbonware software development kit. And we now have about, I think about $80,000 in prize money right now, so we're getting some decent amount of money together for it. And And so there'll be a 3-week-long hackathon for anybody building the best carbon-aware application or the best carbon-aware feature to an application. That'll be running around COP. Unfortunately, the website for that goes live Monday, and I can't share it with you right now. But if you go to the greensoftware.foundation website, sign up to the newsletter, it will send you details of that on Monday when it goes live. But we're very excited about that hackathon that's coming up. And with that is the end of this presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Armin. Please join me for a few questions. I have so many questions.
Okay.
Oh, the cat.
Oh, no.
It likes. Do you know the name of the cat, by the way? Well, the name of the cat is Topple, because it topples all the time. Okay, that didn't work. Good. That's okay. That's fair. That's fine. Fine. So one thing that I wanted to ask you, I mean, it's been very interesting because actually I have a strong feeling, and maybe I'm wrong at this, I have a strong feeling that when in the past, we used to think about accessibility coming up, becoming a default. So if it's a new project, we're going to think about accessibility. If it's an older project, maybe refactoring or anything like that, maybe we'll be baking in some accessibility as time passes by. And at this point, I assume that for most of you here in the room, I think that accessibility is definitely a consideration. I don't think that anybody would say, oh, we can launch a new project without even thinking about accessibility. That's not working. On the other hand, environmental impact had the same role, or has the same role, or maybe had the same role a couple of years ago. It's like, oh, we can get online without thinking about that. And I think it's shifting massively, because many clients I'm working with, it's not supposed to be like a monologue, I promise. There is a question. Okay. But many clients actually think or ask about how can they translate their design choices and development choices, right? Framework choices, compliance choices, and so on. How can they translate, let's say, this decision about images, about fonts, about parallax or no parallax, into actual KPIs that could then be measured with carbon footprint, right? How would you see this working? Is there like a way to have some sort of carbon emission strategy in a design context as well? We can say, okay, we make the decision based on the goals we're trying to reach here.
Yeah. I mean, I think that it definitely is heading towards that direction. I think a lot of the advice right now, as I said, is very early stages, so we're still struggling to kind of, if anybody wants to help out with that, that is one of the reasons I'm here, to try and drum up interest. Yeah. But I'd say like there's two avenues that the pressure for this is generally coming along around. One is cultural. The number of execs I've spoken to who said that they want to explore this space because their children are asking them questions at the dinner table. Like, this is becoming more and more a norm, an expectation. The same way like accessibility is not just like, it's just a norm. Like, it's just an expectation. It's not having accessibility is culturally, it's just not acceptable as much anymore. And I think that's one of the avenues that's coming along. The other one is honestly regulatory. Right? This stuff is not going to be, we're not doing this stuff just to be this is going to be mandatory in the future. And I think that is where a lot of, at least at the corporate level, a lot of the interest in this space is coming from, because they see in the future regulation is coming. We want to demonstrate that we are good corporate citizens, that we're doing things the right way, that we've got the right design thinking, we're thinking about this stuff early in the stage. There's mandatory requirements coming along for reporting emissions. They're coming from every organization. That's becoming lower and lower. So much smaller companies are having to even just measure their emissions.
Absolutely.
But if you're measuring it, you might as well take the next step of like, well, how do I reduce it?
That's right. I think it's interesting because we, at this point, like where we used to be just designing websites in, just Flash. Anybody misses Flash?
Yeah.
Andy. I hope that was a joke.
Wow,
more people. Well, this is getting scary.
Yeah. No. Flash developers they're getting paid these days.
Yeah. But I think so. because we kind of moved in this world where now we have to think about accessibility, we have to think about privacy and GDPR compliance, also have to think about environmental impact and kind of make it all working. So I think it's interesting because if you think about parallax or no parallax, I think in the future we won't even have this discussion. Because it's just not going to be, it's not like it's not going to be allowed, but it's just not going to help us or drive us to the goals that we actually set out in the first place. There's actually a site that I discovered a couple of months ago, which is called Website Carbon.
Website Carbon Analyzer,
Website Carbon Analyzer, where you can plug in a page and it tells you, okay, just how much emission you produce given the traffic that you have. So you can say, okay, if I reduce the image, or in 50% of the size, this is the impact you're getting. Right? So there are a few things like that. So
there's also a Lighthouse plugin, which I should have talked about. I forgot. Perfect for this one. There's a Lighthouse plugin as well, by the way.
So there is a kind of really strong discussion about that. The questions, of course, that come up around that is, I'm a small website. We're building little sites for maybe relative mid-size, e-commerce sites, let's say. But if you look at the big corporations, they don't have eco-friendly or even environmentally aware websites and presences, and they're enterprises on scale. Do I make a difference? This is always the same thing that comes up. That's one of the questions that come up here.
I mean, I get that question quite a lot, actually, because then the question is, because the entirety of tech is also only about, well, it depends on the study that you look at. It ranges between 1 to 3% or 1 to 7%, depending on what you consider as tech now. But the growth of it by 2040, we're going to be about we're actually going to be about 14%. So which is as big as all of the transportation industry right now. Because the argument I say is that if you're building software right now, you're building software because the product is growing and you're in a growth sector. No one's employing massive teams of people to maintain. And if you've got money in a company, so we're in a growth sector and we're growing. And so, you could have the argument. I get these people saying, "Well, why should I bother with doing anything in tech? Because only 1-2%."
Right.
And I'm like, "Well, it's what you do. It's your expertise." So for me, it's all about I want to know how to do the thing that I'm passionate about, the thing that I love, the thing that I do every single day, as sustainably as possible. The other argument I have is that there's depending on the estimates that you have, the number of software practitioners in the world ranges from about 30 million to 70 million. It's kind of like the numbers that people have. And that's that 30 to 70 million have kind of impact 3+% of carbon emissions. So per person, we're actually far more impactful than
creators.
Exactly. So if I was a dentist, what could I do? There's not much I can do. But because we're in the software space, we can actually have quite a significant impact, an impact greater than one normal person in this world can normally have. So
that's interesting because actually, in the end, if we make this decision, okay, I'm just going to, for my team or for myself, just maybe, no parallax, and maybe just not 6 font files, but 3. Right? In the end, it will be having an impact on, if you have a traffic-heavy
10 million visitors,
a traffic-heavy page, it's going to have a massive impact as well. Another thing that came up here as well, what other environmental impacts should be neutralized and people should have an awareness for?
That's really interesting because one of the things we talk about is right now, we're focusing on carbon because it's the biggest kind of thing that people talk about right now. But we actually have a concept in the foundation, I think broader, called Beyond Carbon. Beyond carbon, what are the impacts? And there's lots of water is a big one. Water scarcity is going to become. We're heading for our futures, and they're going to be very challenging. So we're heading for a lot of water scarcity on our future. If you don't know, data centers consume a vast amount of water. But there's also a really interesting piece of work done by an organization. I know that I can't really. Maybe I can. They're going to. So there's these data sets that tell you how clean or dirty your electricity is. They're also coal power plants tend to be built near poorer neighborhoods. They have, you can demonstratively show there's a lot of deaths from people who live close to the coal power plants. Carbon emissions causes death. So there's a company that's going to create a data set where you can see instead of saying what your carbon emissions are for electricity, how many people would die? So then you can have that equation. If I were to turn off those 4 font files, multiply it by a million, I'm going to save 1.2 lives, right? So I think that'll be a much more interesting motivational factor as well.
And I think we're just in the beginning of the discussions, really. I feel like we're kind of starting here, something important. $1 billion questions. A question that came up.
Yeah.
How would you convince very short-term thinking or cost-driven managers and executives, bosses or clients, to invest developer resources into this philosophy?
So this comes up a lot. Like right now, it's getting easier and easier and easier because the expectation and standards around the world are increasing. So more and more organizations are just having to. Your first step is to get your organization to set a target. Some sort of corporate commitment, because without that, you're not going to convince anybody to do anything.
Yeah.
So I encourage you, if you're in an organization that's like that, try and adopt like a net zero target, because that actually has the biggest impact and also gives you the greatest opportunity to do something good. And what was the question? How do you convince execs?
Execs.
Yeah.
And to invest.
And really, like, the world's changing. Like, this is going to become a regulatory standard. I find that, like, I can usually dangle, like, oh, you can make X million dollars if you do sustainability. And people are like, oh, that's interesting. I can make $50 million if I do this. But if you say, like, the EU is exploring a regulatory, one of the things they're exploring is to make kind of, I won't go into it, but there's certain like regulations that are being explored, and then everybody goes, "Oh, okay, well, let's get on this. Let's explore."
Yeah, because we saw something similar with GDPR.
Yeah.
Right? All of a sudden, GDPR is all over. Everybody's writing about GDPR. Everybody's reading about GDPR. Everybody's implementing something GDPR. Tons of conversations about GDPR compliance of Google Analytics or not, and all that. And so this is becoming a major issue. And I think also maybe, I'm not sure if we're there yet, but definitely in Europe, where this is going to be a conversation. Are we GDPR compliant or not?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Maybe, and this is kind of the question that comes up in here, do we need something like GDPR or like privacy by design for carbon aware by design?
Yeah.
Kind of established principles that kind of define how we're designing, how we're building, how we're deploying, and also even things like servers. How do we pick a server? Because sometimes I feel that the easiest way is to just switch to green hosting. It might be more expensive, of course, but this will actually have a tremendous impact as well.
Yeah. Right? Yeah, that has, I definitely think, I think there's regulation. I know the landscape. We're actually doing we're doing a big policy-driven research, which will come out in January next year, the State of Green Software, which is going to list out all the regulatory and policy things that are happening on the horizon, just to get it in one place so people can go, yes, I think regulatory, I forgot my train of thought. It's going to happen.
Yeah. And the last one that came up here, I think the last one.
Oh, and it's going to come up from Europe, guaranteed.
Yeah.
It's either going to come up, there's two, it's either France specifically, or Europe in general is going to be the first country to really set like a regulatory requirement.
Is there like a timeline there or anything?
I don't have anything particularly on the timeline.
I think I heard somewhere about like 2028, 2030, but I'm not sure. I cannot guarantee that. Yeah. Maybe the last one. Another issue regarding cleanliness is the production of tools that are supposed to produce clean energy, like solar panels, wind turbines, and so on, which is oftentimes quite harmful to the environment, as is the recycling issue. Other ways how to make those issues visible and to be able to judge better how clean or dirty your electricity actually is.
Yeah. I think that's like when you look at kind of the carbon intensity of electricity measures, that it doesn't factor in the carbon cost of building like a wind turbine and a solar panel and all this stuff. Yes, it has. We live in a world right now where it is impossible not to emit carbon for anything. So every solution is going to emit carbon. The question you've always got to ask is, what is the alternative? So if you're saying no to a solar panel and no to a wind farm, you're saying yes to a coal power plant that's going to emit a lot of pollution and kill more people. You can actually, I should have shown that chart as well. There's a wonderful chart that shows deaths per megawatt hour. Now we all know what megawatt hours. Deaths per megawatt hour, and coal is right up there. And you can see different solutions cause fewer deaths. And nuclear is actually the least harmful of the world. More people die from solar than nuclear, actually, because most people fall off their roofs trying to install those. This is true. More people fall off their roofs trying to install solar panels and have died from nuclear, which is quite interesting.
Okay.
But it's a hell of a lot less than coal and gas and all that other stuff.
Yeah. I mean, it wouldn't be very surprising to me to see that maybe, well, right now we have different dark mode and light mode and reduced motion and things like that. Maybe we'll have those buttons saying eco-friendly mode being a default, and then actually turning or showing images and or videos as well.
Yeah.
Like one little thing that we're thinking now in a project I'm involved with is actually most of the time when you think about people watching video, you get options, full HD, maybe 360p, and maybe 2K or 4K. But I rarely see video players, they have an option audio only.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
Because many people would just listen to it because they have something going on one screen and then kind of working on the other.
Yeah.
So it should become a standard that we just have audio only, or maybe just transcript the text only.
Yeah. Yeah.
So something like that.
Yeah, something like that. And actually, what you mentioned, I forgot. Eco mode is like one of the things that we think about a lot. So when I was talking about demand shaping, when everything's a bit dirty right now, can you have an eco mode? And I was actually talking to one of the companies that make browsers. You can probably guess the one. And they were talking about, I was saying, like, let's do, like, if you think about what is an eco mode? Well, they prefer to call it a performance mode. Because if you're ecoing, it means you're reducing feature set, which means you're making the experience faster. So, like, call it a performance mode. And then, it's not about being, everybody says like, eco is like, less, it's a bit crappy, but like performance mode, you're going faster, you're going greater.
Oh, here we go. So this is all about branding, I guess.
Yeah. Use the right words.
All right. So I think we have a lot more questions coming here, but I think at this point, Austin, we should be wrapping up. Thank you so much for being with us and sharing your insights.
Thank you very much. Cheers. Bye.
Thank you.